Welcome to Minerva. I'm Vera and this is part 2 of the travel vlog. I am coming to you from very rainy Germany, so it's very nice to be able to travel back to sunny Scotland. I left you when we went on the train from Edinburgh to Glasgow, where we were apparently driven by Darth Vader. This was an incredibly easy journey and we arrived in Glasgow without any issues. The first thing we did when we arrived in Glasgow was to visit the Yarn Cafe.
I do have to say, there's a lot more awareness about about people in wheelchairs in Scotland, and I think it's also in England that we're not there yet. But because there's a lot more awareness of A, invisible disabilities, B, that not everyone who is in a wheelchair is paralyzed, and also C, like the guy, they said, well, there's about the same amount of stairs, so I don't know if that's okay for you. And yeah, there's a lot more of like, there are about 8 steps over there.
Yeah.
And it's a lot more, how do I say this? It's a lot more common, I think, in Scotland, that normal, everyday people are aware of this. Is it still open? That looks closed.
No, it's a knitting circle.
This is a yarn store with a little cafe area in the store as well. And it was super nice. When we arrived, there was a group of women sitting there and knitting, and yeah, we had a nice conversation. We got to talk to the owner about my wheelchair, and there was another person there as well who is also an ambulant wheelchair user. So we basically talked shop about the wheelchair, which was really nice because I don't get to usually do that. At that time, I didn't know anyone who also uses a wheelchair. So it was really nice to be able to talk shop with people who know something about it, because that's not something that I usually have in my life. I really underestimated how nice that is. The yarn selection they had themselves was amazing as well. The rest of our time in Glasgow, we said that we were going to go back to the Yarn Cafe because it was just so nice there, but we didn't have any time whatsoever to do that. But you know, oh well, I have to go back to Glasgow one day. What a punishment. And that is pretty much all we did in Glasgow that day. We don't have a lot of footage of Glasgow in general because we went there to celebrate the wedding of 2 of our friends. So we wanted the time before, during and after the wedding to just spend the time with them because we haven't seen them in quite a while. And we just wanted to enjoy being there. So that is why we don't have a lot of footage of Glasgow, but don't worry, I will also do the finer thoughts in this video. So there's plenty to talk about. The next morning we went on a tour through Clydeside Distillery, which is a really new whiskey distillery in pretty much the heart of Glasgow. We thought it was pretty easy to go to because there is a bus stop that stops right around, like about 5 minutes away from the distillery. But we were very wrong because we needed to go over the overpass to cross the road, and the overpass was built of steps, so the wheelchair could not possibly go on the overpass. Thankfully, we found this really nice guy who was able to tell us that there was actually an underpass not that far away, or well, he said it wasn't that far away, but it actually took us 30 minutes to walk next to the road, to go under the underpass, and then walk back again to where we actually were supposed to cross the road. So this actually meant that we missed our tour, but it was not an issue whatsoever because they have tours about every 30 minutes or every hour, and we could just join the next tour. On the way back, we took another bus, which did indeed stop pretty much right outside of the distillery, but that bus only goes once every hour, so please do bear this in mind. Clydeside Distillery itself was completely accessible. On the accessibility section of their website, they have information about the door width, the type of floors, type of lights, height, the height of the buttons, noises, how to operate the buttons, etc, etc. And even the toilet was described on the website, and that was completely accessible as well. So it was really, really accessible. And again, this does seem to be the norm in Scotland, or at least as far as I could tell. There was a whiskies tasting section of the tour, which I don't drink any whiskey, and they asked about this. And if you don't drink any whiskey like me, or any alcohol, they will give you the other national drink of Scotland, which is the Iron Brew. And yeah, it was no problem. They asked about it before. So they are really aware of people who don't drink, which is not always the case in environments like this. And I'm gonna take my cardigan off because it's way too warm. Iron Brew as a drink is very interesting, and I leave it up to you to decide whether or not you like it. The whiskey was pretty good as well. I've got it on good authority that it's pretty good, and they do sell some of the whiskey on site. After the brewery, we took the bus into town and we spent some time in a park.
Calming sounds of traffic.
Yes. Well, we're here at the park. It's quite nice. It's very sunny today. We've been super lucky with the weather so far. And now, from now on, it's just gonna rain. We still have Friday and Saturday, and then Sunday we take the night train. So yeah, Glasgow is a beautiful city actually. It's not as pretty as Edinburgh, but it's a lot nicer to move around in with a wheelchair because there are no cobblestones. and it's less hilly. There's still some hills, but they're not as huge. Except for the one hill we went on this morning when we went to the bus store. We found the one hill, like the one actual mountain in the entirety of the city.
Dutch calling anything a hill a mountain.
That was a mountain though. That was an actual mountain. Like you had to push me. You were not happy with it. You were exhausted. You were panting.
Just pushing up a big fucking hill.
That was a mountain.
We're allowed to swear on this.
Because it was super nice weather, really sunny, just perfect weather to hang out in a park. And then we went to meet our friends in Wilson Street Pantry to have lunch. And Wilson Street Pantry is also completely accessible. There is also a huge gluten-free menu. There is a vegan menu, but it's a little bit smaller. And they have a lot of information about allergens on the menu. They have a really massive accessible toilet, and I do mean massive toilet. It was huge. Then it was still a beautiful day, so we decided to go hang out in the park after going to the Wilson Street Pantry for another little bit. The next day was the wedding, so we didn't actually do anything except for knitting and watching some telly in our accommodation. The venue where the wedding was, the Oran Moor, was also completely accessible, which was really nice. The venue is on the first floor, but there is an elevator available in the restaurant that is in the same building as the venue itself. So you can go into the restaurant and take the elevator there. The venue itself, they have an accessible toilet again, and they have a ramp, so you can pretty much go everywhere. They're also incredible with dealing with food allergies. I have a lot of allergies, and they were completely able to modify their menu for me to have, so that was very nice. Same for the Saturday after the wedding. We decided to again meet up with our friends.
This one's also cute. What's cute is that one?
Why do you want the cows, Vera?
What?
Why do you want the cows?
Because they're fluffy.
And we went to the Wetherspoons, that is called the Counting House, in the middle of Glasgow, I believe, and they are fully accessible as well. There is an elevator to go into the building because the area to sit in is on the first floor and not on the ground floor. But the elevator is a bit broken, so we needed to have someone to open the door for us because the door really, really jams. And someone else needed to go up the stairs and hail the elevator from above because the button is broken in the elevator. But don't let that fool you, it actually is accessible, and I could go inside and I could go to the first floor. This Saturday is also the only day of rain, or the only hour of rain we had in our entire week in Scotland, which I'm told is quite a feat. We had originally planned to do some hiking around Loch Lomond because there are accessible hikes available, but in the end we didn't have time for this, so we didn't do this, and I really am sad about it because I would have loved to go and see some of the countryside in Scotland. And I think they have accessible hikes pretty much everywhere. Sunday, unfortunately, was our last day in Scotland, so we had to leave our accommodation, and because we were booked on the night train from Edinburgh to London, we had an entire day that we could just spend in Glasgow.
We are in the Botanic Gardens in Glasgow, and it is super nice around here.
You are incredibly overdressed for this warmth.
No,
I am toasting.
no, I feel comfortable. I'm perfectly comfortable. I think it's 18 degrees today.
Feels warmer in jeans.
Nah, it was a bit cold earlier, but when the sun's out, it's nice. When the sun is not out, it's cold. So we are actually in the vegetable patch of the Botanic Gardens, and it's super peaceful here. You can hear the birds and everything.
And the Botanical Gardens in Glasgow are completely free, and I think because it is free, people tend to use it as a park, which is super nice. There were people sat and enjoying the sun everywhere. And we actually did take a bit of a nap here because we were super tired. The Botanical Gardens is also completely accessible. They have a section outside, and then they have greenhouses, and also the greenhouses are completely accessible. They are a bit narrow at times though, but you can easily go through them in a wheelchair. There is also an accessible toilet in the Botanic Gardens, but they do lock them. We think because it was Sunday, there wasn't anyone there who I presume usually cleans the toilets, so we couldn't actually go and ask for a key, but instead we went to the tea room that is a part of the Botanic Gardens, and we explained the situation, and they let us use their bathroom, although they did tell us, like, look, we've only got one bathroom, so if there's a queue, you're gonna have to wait, which is perfectly fine in my opinion. Their toilet is also, again, completely accessible, and they actually do have a small period pantry there, which was really nice to see. But yeah, this was actually an amazing day. It was super nice weather. The Botanical Gardens are beautiful. It's a nice spot just to spend some time in Glasgow. I can recommend it to everyone if you enjoy this type of stuff. It was a bit steep at times, but again, it wasn't so steep that I had any trouble with my wheelchair. And we had a super lovely day there. Before we decided to go to catch the train from Glasgow to Edinburgh, we decided to go and have an ice cream because we hadn't had any ice cream on our entire week of holiday, and that is just simply unacceptable. So we went to Minted Ice Cream, which is an ice cream parlor somewhere in Glasgow. I can't tell you where exactly, but they are semi-accessible.
I was going for 15 seconds before you realised.
I was a bit in my own world to be fair.
How's the Earl Grey ice cream?
Really good. Most of the flavour I'm getting is your honeydew.
There's a bit of a curve to get into, but you can maneuver your wheelchair inside once you are inside. And they have some vegan ice cream and some non-vegan ice cream, and the ice creams were incredible. It was so delicious. I had the Earl Grey ice cream, and yeah, really enjoyed it. Really good ice cream. You know, you can't go on holiday, on summer holiday of all things, and then not have an ice cream, right? So that's what we did. We had an ice cream there, and then we walked to the station, Glasgow Queen Street station, and I don't know how I did it, but I think it was the cobblestones of Glasgow and Edinburgh that just kind of always knocked the rubber ring of my caster a little bit out of place. And then in Glasgow, I bumped into this tiny lump. Really, it was the tiniest lump ever. And the rubber band across my caster wheel came off. So that rendered the wheelchair completely unable to move. And Charlie couldn't get it back on himself. It was Sunday, so we thought that all of the bike shops and everything was closed. So we didn't really know what to do, but we did need to fix it before we could get to the station. And I wish I had taken some footage of this because it was very funny, but I didn't. But there were 3 incredibly bulky Scottish men that we didn't know standing over me, around me, all pushing on this one rubber ring of the caster wheel, trying to get it back in, and eventually they did. It was super funny. There was also another woman waiting with me to make sure that I was safe, that I knew these people, that I knew Charlie, and I really appreciated that at the time as well. And this is what solidarity looks like, people. We got on the train at Queen's Street Station, which I think is pretty central in Glasgow. And this is completely accessible as well. They have an elevator. They do also have an accessible toilet, but it is behind a 50p paywall, just like the other toilets. Bear this in mind. However, I believe that if you wait long enough, there will be a kind Scottish person jump in the fence for you and let you in to use the toilet without paying. Obviously, that didn't happen to me. Again, I was super impressed with this accessible toilet. Huge. They had a toilet, they had a push bar, they had a shower, they had an adult change and shower station as well. And yeah, it was just incredible, and really impressed with this. And I know that I shouldn't be, right? Because that is the bare minimum. But where I live, that doesn't happen at all. So it's a really nice change. The toilet even had a lift. So we had assistance on to get on and off of the train in Queen Street, Edinburgh and London as well. It was about a 2-hour journey back from Glasgow to Edinburgh, and this was very easy. And then when we arrived back in Edinburgh, we just had about time to have a drink in a pub, but we didn't have any more time. And we had this drink before we went to the Caledonian Sleeper lounge. The Caledonian Sleeper does have a first lounge available on Waverley Station in Edinburgh, but because it was Sunday, they are closed. They're always closed on Sundays, Thursdays and Fridays. And everyone who uses assistance or who needs assistance is welcome to use this lounge. But because it is closed, they have a deal with the Scotsman Hotel that they have a lounge available for first class and people who use wheelchairs to wait until they can board the train so that they can charge their wheelchairs, because we can't do that on board of the train. This was quite a bit of a attractive find.
Making it like you're on a really steep hill.
I am on a really steep hill.
Like an even steeper hill than you are.
Because people who can walk can use the overpass, but we couldn't do that, so we had to get around the buildings to go down again to the entrance of the hotel. I mean, when I say a bit of a trek, it took us about 20 minutes to find, but probably only because we had no idea where it was. When we wanted to go out of the hotel to get to the station, that's when we realized there was actually an elevator and an entrance like literally right next to Waverley Station. We just hadn't seen it on the way there. In the lounge there was tea, coffee and everything else available, and we could charge the wheelchair there and just relax for a bit before going to the new Caledonian Sleeper.
Go to Market Street?
Yeah. Hiccup.
Why do I have the hiccup again?
Look, it's us. 0.
There is no 0.
1 minute. Wait. Where's... This is lift 2, we need to go to lift 1.
Oh, I thought not.
I saw another lift through here.
Yeah, that's true.
God, these doors are heavy.
Oh, these lifts are extremely painful. Wow, that was
There's another lift through here. She's there.
So we are on the way to Waverley Station in Edinburgh to take the New Caledonian. It's right there. It's a sleeper train, and this is honestly the highlight of Charlie's trip. Like, this is the one thing my partner has been looking for, and the wedding, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, that's...
Okay. You done dying?
Do I sound like I'm done by? The parking siren.
When you're boarding the train, so when you're going to the station on the platform to go to the entrance of the train, or rather the entrance of your carriage in the train, they do ask, it's kind of like boarding a plane where they ask you to check in, they ask you about your ticket, they ask you your name, etc, etc. It was much less formal as boarding a train, so that was nice. There is a ramp available on the station, and it was super easy to get onto the train. And we were so pleasantly surprised when we got onto the train, because we have taken sleeper trains before, and it was always a bit, you know, it's okay for one night, but it's not always the epitome of luxury. But this one did feel pretty luxurious.
I have to say, I am really curious to see what the cabin will be like.
Yeah, me too.
Because they said it was going to be a really big compartment.
We've got a big room, yeah.
Who knows, maybe that's the size of our Glasgow.
Half a carriage. We're spread out like royalty.
I think there was someone else with the wheelchair. The first car alone, he said, but we're...
Third.
Yeah, but we're number B.
Yeah, I'm assuming the second car is the club car.
Well, that would actually make sense. It's a very big moment for Charlie. This is what he's been waiting for at least months. Whenever we knew we would go to... I mean, since whenever he knew that this train existed, he's been going, I want to go on this sleeper train. And now we're finally here. That is true.
No, I got excited when I knew that we could go on it. It's not like I found out. There's a guy at the ramp. Ramp man has gone that way. Here's Vera. I'm afraid I've had a very small amount of coffee and I'm a little excited.
You're drunk on the possibilities of taking the sleeper train on us, you are. I am quite curious to see if the dining car is also accessible.
Yeah, true.
From our wagon.
Yeah.
Wagon, during 1800s. Wow.
There is an accessible carriage on the New Caledonian Sleeper, which is where our compartment was. And the way that it's laid out is that there's one accessible compartment here, and then there's one accessible compartment here, and then there are two accessible toilets here, so right next to the accessible compartment. And then there is a very narrow strip where you can walk, because this compartment is also for non-disabled people. The hallway to go from one end of the carriage to the other end of the carriage was extremely small. Like, it just fitted about one walking person. But when we boarded the train, we realized that one of the accessible toilets, the one next to our compartment, was broken. I'm pretty sure they fixed it very quickly, but we couldn't use that toilet for the first hour or so on the journey. I had to get out of my wheelchair to go to the other toilet. But again, like I said, they fixed it pretty quickly, and it was not an issue for me, but it might be an issue for you. I don't think that the toilets break very often. It was really a one-off event. And when it was fixed, the bathroom was amazing, it was huge, it was fully accessible, just like our compartment was. And we got upgraded to the double bed because they have one accessible compartment with a double bed and they have one accessible compartment with a bunk bed, essentially. And our compartment was very, very nice. It was pretty big to begin with. It had a double bed, good size double bed. It also had a little indentation next to the bed so you can store your wheelchair there, right next to the bed, so you could transfer in and out of the bed. There was an accessible sink and there was an accessible desk as well. So it was pretty good. And the bed was pretty comfortable as well. It had plenty of chargers available throughout the room as well. You just can't charge your wheelchair on the train, and I believe that must have something to do with how much electricity they can generate. We also had a window that we could look out of, and we almost wished that we had more time on the New Caledonian Sleeper, because the train didn't leave until 11 p.m. and we were scheduled to arrive at 8 a.m. in London the next day. So we pretty much boarded the train, handed over our breakfast slip, got ready for bed and fell asleep. And I think that's really a testimony to the quality of the New Caledonian Sleeper, because like I said, we've been on sleeper trains before where we really couldn't wait to get out because it just wasn't comfortable, it was loud, it was just not a very pleasant experience, and this journey really was. So like I briefly mentioned before, once you board your compartment, there is a little slip of paper on the desk or anywhere in the compartment that is basically the breakfast menu. You fit it in and you give it to one of the staff members so that they can give you breakfast in the morning. This does cost money, but I don't believe it was quite expensive. If you do order breakfast, they will wake you up in the morning about 1 hour 20 minutes before the train is scheduled to arrive to give you your breakfast. Or at least that's when they woke us up and they gave us our tea and our coffee. If you don't order breakfast, they will wake you up about 20 minutes before the train is scheduled to arrive. Now, I was really glad that we ordered breakfast because I don't think we would have been ready in time if we had only been given 20 minutes to pack and get off the train. We did arrive a little bit earlier in London than we were scheduled to, but they also basically expect you to get off of the train as soon as the train gets into the station, which makes sense, you know. But I was very glad to have that extra hour because we just needed a bit of time to wake up, have a tea, have a bit of breakfast, open the windows, look outside of the windows. Yeah, just have a bit of a slow morning. Maybe you can wake up and get out of the door within 20 minutes. If you can, more power to you, but I certainly can't. I need a bit of time to wake up. Of course, you can set your alarms, and we did actually do that, but because we were a bit earlier in London, we still wouldn't have had quite a lot of time. Getting off of the Caledonian Sleeper was absolutely no problem at all. We did have to wait a little bit for the ramp to get to our door. Yeah, we had no trouble at all. And well, it was worth it. The New Caledonian Sleeper was certainly worth it to us. They even put the ramp down without us having to ask for it, which is more than we can say about other trains, as you will see a little bit later. So in London, we were once again upgraded to the business lounge for the Eurostar, which leads me to believe that this is just something that they always do with people who use wheelchairs and people who ask for assistance. We managed to check in a little bit earlier than we would normally be allowed to, because we needed to charge the wheelchair basically. The battery was quite finished because we had an entire day in Glasgow. We only had about 1 hour to charge it before the New Caledonian Sleeper, and then we had a couple of hours again in London that we used to walk around. So we did really need to charge the battery, but it was no problem. We could go through customs and ticket checks a bit earlier, so that was really nice. In London St Pancras there was no special queue, special accessible queue or business lounge queue to go through customs or security. So we did have to wait a little bit there, which is why we realized how amazing it was that Belgium did have that special queue. It just made us feel so much more relaxed. But afterwards, this custom agent came to us and helped us skip the queues, basically. So we could come with her and we could go through passport checks with her. She was also the one we handed our passports to, and she was the one to give them to the custom agents in the cages. They were in cages. That doesn't sound really good, but I promise you they were in cages. So the business lounge in London was quite a bit busier than the one in Brussels. And we believe that is because there are a lot more trains leaving from London than there were from Brussels. Charlie had a lot of fun because he could try out all of the different drinks and snacks and breakfast things that were available there. So I do believe he had quite a good wait. In Brussels, they did come to pick us up from the business lounge, which they didn't do in London. They do announce on the loudspeakers when a certain train is ready to board. So you don't have to worry about this. Because they didn't come to pick us up from the business lounge, it was a little bit more chaotic trying to get to the platform. Also because they did have elevators, but you needed a key to use an elevator. So you always needed to be in the elevator with staff. They don't have stairs, I believe, but they have these weird flat escalators that are also in the airport that you can get onto on the airport, but then it did go up. I'm not explaining that very well, am I? I'm sorry, it's been a very long couple of weeks and I'm quite tired. When we made it on the platform, again, it was a bit chaotic trying to find out where the ramp would be. I don't think they actually told us, or maybe we just didn't see it. So we had to walk around a bit, but again, this is fine. There is a ramp, so if you do this yourself as well, there is a ramp available for you. We decided to go out and enjoy Brussels for a little bit because we actually have 3 hours here. So we did want to go out into the town and see what Brussels is like. But to be honest, this was a mistake. Walking around in Brussels with the wheelchair was absolutely awful. Any dropped curbs, for instance, so it did take quite a bit of thinking to just walk around there. Eventually we did make it to the chocolatier, where Charlie bought some real Belgian chocolates for himself and our housemates. I couldn't actually go inside the store because there was a really big step to get into the store, but also the store was incredibly narrow, so I wouldn't have fit in there anyway. And I did get the impression that happens a lot more in Brussels. I don't know because I only was there for 3 hours. Take this with a grain of salt. I didn't mind staying outside though because the weather was amazing. I think what also didn't help was because there was a public holiday the Monday that we were there, so it was just a bit quiet and a bit weird. I think if you go there on not a public holiday, it might be a lot nicer because a lot of the stores were also closed. The way back to this train station was even more awful. We decided to take public transport because we didn't give ourselves quite enough time to make it back to the station. None of the undergrounds were accessible. There was no elevator, so I had to get up and take the escalator myself, which is not an issue for me, but it might be an issue for you if you are less ambulant or not at all ambulant. I don't think I would recommend going to Brussels if you are someone who uses a wheelchair. Of course, I have only had 3 hours there, but it was really not a good experience whatsoever. But I also know from other people who use wheelchairs and who do live in Brussels that it is extremely difficult to get around there whilst using a wheelchair. Once we were in the station, I did really need to use the bathroom, but again, they closed the accessible bathroom and they locked it, so I couldn't use it. And why do people do this? People who use the accessible toilet still need to use the toilet even though it is a public holiday. Like, come on, please leave these toilets open. So we did eventually find someone who worked there, who got someone else who worked there to guide us through to a different accessible toilet. I think this was the toilet for staff, but as soon as we were in the train, in the ice train, we had no problems whatsoever anymore. The ramp in Brussels was available and it was just really good. Back in Germany, so the way we had to travel was from Brussels to Cologne and then from Cologne back to our home.
How did you feel during your first trip in one of these?
It was weird. It was very awkward, but it worked. So I'm out of the train, so it worked.
The ramp system they have in Germany is incredible. It is not just a ramp, it's this kind of high-tech German engineering cage where they have one ramp that goes down into the train and then you wheel yourself onto it. And because the trains are higher than the platform, the ramp is really high. So you are really high above all the other people. And then they shut down the first ramp that you went on from the train to the cage, put the ramp down altogether, open up the second ramp, and you can get out. When he was walking around with me in the ramp, I was about as tall as everyone's heads. So that was really funny. However, this was almost the last stop of our holiday. We had to have one more stop. And remember that I told you that we had no issues whatsoever with the ramps going in and out of the train. Unfortunately, that wasn't true. When we got to the station in our hometown, there was no ramp available. And thankfully, there was another woman with a pram who was able to notify someone on the station that there were still 2 people waiting to get out of the train, but we needed a ramp. Be mindful of this because this can happen when you travel. So I would recommend you do make sure that every conductor knows that you need a ramp and which station you get off. And you can also call ahead to make sure that there will be a ramp available. I think everyone who uses a wheelchair knows that we have to be incredibly assertive or people will forget about us. Unfortunately, that was the final stop on our journey, so that was also the end of our holiday. So I have some final thoughts. It was very easy to travel on the ICE trains, the Eurostar and the LNER trains in England. And it was also very easy to travel on the trains in Scotland. I would especially recommend the Eurostar to everyone who uses a wheelchair. And because you stay seated in your chair, you can push yourself to the toilet if and when you need it. So when I hear about all of the disrespect of airline towards wheelchair users, how difficult they make it, the fact that you can't wheel yourself on and off an airplane, the fact that you therefore need to wait until there's someone who can take you off the plane, or the fact that, you have to be lucky so that there is a chair available in the train so you can use the bathroom in the flight. And that's not even talking about whether or not the airline handles your wheelchair carefully and doesn't break it, because that happens a lot. So I don't understand why anyone who uses a wheelchair and can take a train will not take a train. In my opinion, a train is so much better than an airplane. That also goes for the climate emergency that we're facing as well. We did have to chase them up once about the ramp in Germany, but considering we took about 9 trains, this is actually not a really bad statistic. It was amazing staying in Scotland and using a wheelchair there. Of course, I've only been to Edinburgh and I've only been to Glasgow, so I cannot speak about the entire country. But I have a feeling that there is so much more general knowledge about disabilities and hidden disabilities, and therefore people who use wheelchairs. And it seems to be that accessibility is a much bigger thing in Scotland than it is pretty much anywhere I've been. It seems like venues and even hikes are accessible, and they do put a lot of effort into making sure that the information about accessibility is there so you can use it. And this is not just people with mobility issues, but it's visually impaired people, it is deaf people, hard of hearing people, people with other mobility issues, people who are autistic. It's a really big list, and it made traveling in Scotland incredibly easy. Almost every accessible toilet had a sticker on the toilet door saying that not every disability is visible. And that is also so important, because I think, you know, for those of us with hidden disabilities, it's often quite scary using an accessible toilet because people will judge you. And I felt like there was so much more knowledge in Scotland about this. Like, again, I have only been to Edinburgh and Glasgow, so I cannot comment about the entire country. But if you have been travelling through Scotland with a wheelchair, or even a pram, can you let me know if it is just as accessible elsewhere? I felt like there was a lot of general knowledge about disabilities, and just in general, like normal people as well. And with normal people, I don't mean non-disabled people, but I mean people who don't get into contact with people with disabilities because of their work or anything else. Every person that we talked to about stairs, for example, could tell me exactly how many steps there were on that stairs. And so in that way, gave me the opportunity to decide if that is something that I could or couldn't do. I felt like it was totally not a big thing in Scotland whatsoever. Also, I've met so many people who know about wheelchairs or use a wheelchair or know someone who uses a wheelchair, and they ask me about my electric wheels. So that whatever their sister or their father or whatever their wife could use it. And that is so amazing. It's really nice to feel like you're a visible part of the community, because people who use wheelchairs don't often get that. We did feel like there isn't a lot of knowledge about electric wheels in Scotland so far, so we did kind of feel like we were spreading the gospel as we were going through Scotland. A special shout out to the Yarn Cafe. It was so nice to talk to you and the women who were there about my wheelchair. It was so nice to see your enthusiasm about my wheelchair, about the colour of my wheelchair, the wheels of my wheelchair. And it was really so nice to be able to talk about this with people who know about this and people who are in the same situation as me. And I hadn't realised how nice that is, because I don't usually get to experience that. All in all, I really enjoyed our time in Edinburgh and Glasgow. It was really nice to see our friends again, as it had been quite a while. It was amazing being able to stay with two of them, and it was also amazing to celebrate the wedding of two of them. The cobblestones in Edinburgh especially were a bit hard to manoeuvre over, but this was mostly in the historic centre. It didn't really seem to be much of an issue aside from that, except for South Queensferry, which was totally not accessible. Thankfully, I was with Charlie and two more of our friends, so I did manage, but I'm not sure if I would have managed, if I could have managed if I was by myself. But it was such an incredibly stark difference between accessibility in Scotland and accessibility in Germany, because it made me realize how much mental energy and how much pushing through and frustration there is being someone who uses a wheelchair in Germany, because I didn't feel that way at all in Scotland. Curbs were dropped, there were ramps, people knew about it, people cared about it, and that is not something that I get to experience here. That was also not something that I got to experience in Brussels. We also wanted to go to Loch Lomond because they had accessible hikes, and how amazing is that, accessible hikes. And again, I shouldn't be so excited about it because it literally is the bare minimum, but it is still so rare. that when I do encounter it, I do get really excited. I do feel really confident recommending travelling to Scotland and travelling through Scotland to other people who use wheelchairs. We had a really good time. This was the end of my travel vlogs from Germany to Scotland. They were very detailed, I know, but I also know that when I'm travelling, I always get really nervous about whether or not I can travel to certain places in the wheelchair, if certain places are accessible. And I find that there's not a lot of information about this on the internet. So I wanted to give you the details, let you know if you could travel somewhere, where, if you go to a certain city, where you can travel, if you can go through the attractions, if you can go to the supermarkets, if you can go to cafes, etc. So that's why I made these vlogs as detailed as they are. I hope you enjoyed them. Let me know what you thought about them. Let me know if you are a wheelchair user, do you feel comfortable traveling to Scotland? If you like this video, please like and subscribe as it helps a new channel out. I will also link the first part of my travel vlogs down below. Bye!